When the pandemic turned everyone's lives upside down, it was initially pretty messy. Now that it seems most people have adapted, a growing number are having a change of heart about their former work lives. With us to figure out what's going on, all of them in the West End of Ontario's capital city, let's welcome Vass Bednar. She is Executive Director of McMaster University's Master of Public Policy and Digital Society program and a member of the Ontario Workplace Advisory Committee. Deena Ladd is here. She's Executive Director of the Workers' Action Centre. And Robyn Doolittle, investigative reporter for the Globe and Mail. And we're delighted to have you three back on TVO tonight for a discussion that is certainly, this great resignation, as we're calling it, is certainly happening big time in the United States. And we want to find out if it's happening as forcefully here in Canada. To the extent that it is, Vass, get us started here. What do you think's driving it?
You know, one of the things that could be driving what we're dabbling at calling a great resignation is just that people have had a period of time to be very self-reflective and think about what's next. And maybe some people are investing in themselves in the very same way that we expect people to invest themselves in terms of new training, reskilling for this thing called the future of work, right? So to the extent that the great resignation is people making different career moves or changes, I actually think that could be a fantastic thing for Canada, but it's not quite bearing out in the data just yet.
Right, and we'll pick up on that in just a few minutes. Deena, how about to you? To the extent that it's happening in Canada, what do you think is driving it?
I mean, I don't really see it as the Great Resignation. I think it's kind of like a protest. And I think a lot of workers are saying, we actually don't want to go back to work that is stressful, that is precarious, that is unsafe, where we constantly have to be thinking about, you know, how to protect ourselves and how to protect our families when we go home. For sure, there are those folks who have been able to retrain and take this moment. But I think for a lot of workers, they're also saying, you know what, if you want me to come back to work, you got to change those working conditions. And I'm not prepared for this kind of, you know, bad job anymore.
Robyn, what has your reporting uncovered in this area?
I say this as a reporter and also as a mother of a 2- and 4-year-old. I think it's survival. I think especially anyone who's had little children through the last year and a half, you are pushed to the brink every day with no end in sight, and that forces you to make some changes.
Make some changes and sort of fill in that blank a little bit more. What have you done?
What have I done? Well, I spend most weekends working. That's one example. So it's been a real interesting year as we've been at the Globe unrolling our Power Gap series, which is something we started before the pandemic, and it's been looking at gender inequities in the workplace. And I have to say, I hope my editors aren't listening, but the series is, you know, I have some stories that we're supposed to run by now, but just can't. Last week, I had to take 3 days off work because my 2-year-old had a cough and we had to go get COVID tests, and I had to get a COVID test. And my 4-year-old can't go to school when my 2-year-old is off waiting for a COVID test, which means I end up working on the weekends. And I worked 2 nights once my husband got home from work to make up the time. And this is just, you know, not an unusual week for me. This has been a constant barrage for the last year and a half. And I know it's been constant for so many parents out there, and especially this like double whammy of, especially earlier on, where you couldn't rely on grandparents, you couldn't rely on those people that usually help you carry water through these types of regular childhood illnesses. It's been so hard, and I'm really lucky that I work at a workplace that's very flexible and lets me take these extra types of shifts to make up the time, but so many people do not have that kind of flexibility, and I have no idea how they're doing it.
But Deena, let me put this to you and you tell me if there's anything to it. We've for many, many years had employees here in the province of Ontario who feel underappreciated, who feel they're not being paid enough, who feel their workplaces aren't safe enough, who, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet they've still gone to work anyway, for the most part. We are starting to see data that suggests, certainly in the States, to a lesser extent here, people aren't putting up with that as much anymore. What's the straw that's breaking the camel's back this time?
I mean, I think that there's 2 or 3 different scenarios because, of course, we're dealing with a mass amount of workers. I mean, there are those workers who didn't have a choice during the pandemic to stay at home, and they've just had to go to work and put up with the kinds of working conditions that we know are to be true and that have been exposed during the pandemic. So, short-term, part-time, temp agency work. Then there are those workers who we're working in the sort of low wage sector in entertainment, hospitality, tourism, the restaurant industry. And I think finally got a bit of a chance out of the grind of that daily type of work. Because when you're working 12 to 14 hours a day and you're in that daily grind, it's hard to imagine doing anything else. And I think for some folks who are in those minimum wage jobs, say in the restaurant sector, they have taken this opportunity to move into another area of work, which I think has been great. And then there are people, like Robyn, who have little kids or who have kids who have not been able to be vaccinated yet, and who basically are feeling like they're going to put their lives and their children's lives at risk during a pandemic, and so have chosen to not go back to work and have made that really brutal decision because it's meant that for many people, they're now working 2 or 3 jobs, or they're doing split shifts, or they're trying to figure out how to make ends meet. And so we are seeing huge rising debt, poverty, and a massive increase in stress of people trying to figure out how to deal with this new labor market. But I think the biggest issue here is also how to also stay healthy and well and keep their families safe during this time period.
Okay, Vass, I got a 2-part follow-up for you. First of all, you're on this thing called the Ontario Workplace Advisory Committee. What's the mission of that committee?
The mission of that committee is pretty broad, actually. I can't scoop our report, but it is with the minister and the minister's office. And this is a panel that the Ford government struck under Minister Monty McNaughton to consider the future of work and future of workers in Ontario and kind of what this moment might mean for workers and workers of all kinds. And in doing that work, I think the pandemic has sort of forced us to reconcile with this kind of even bigger bifurcation of the labor market. And we've kind of been talking about it already, right? On the one hand, we have maybe more white collar workers that can negotiate or have more flexibility with work. These workers are very powerful right now in terms of they can work for anyone, arguably, and work from anywhere. They have autonomy over their time. And this is what's allowing them to maybe find a new work-life balance. And then we have workers that have more place-based work, retail and service work. They have far less autonomy over their time, many of which we called essential workers in this time in the pandemic, but they have been under-supported, undervalued, and they're making their own, starting to make either their own decisions, as Deena was saying, in terms of being able to have breathing space and get away from the grind, but they may be unable to make up those hours that they can't do because a child has to be home or they have to care for a loved one. So I think everyone in different ways is trying to find, how do you balance professional obligations with at-home obligations? So I'm rambling, but maybe 2 conversations. One is about autonomy and time when it comes to work, and the other is about meaning. Because I think that conversation about essentiality forced a lot of people to reckon with what the work that they were doing and whether it was truly meaningful to them. And I can't help but think of the David Graeber book from 2018, Bullshit Jobs. Are you allowed to say that word on TVO?
I think you just did.
I know, but this is the title of a book. Like, it was not. Anyway, that book was basically just sort of making the case that there's a lot of kind of mostly middle management type jobs that the people that hold them know that they are meaningless, and that the effect on them as people is corrosive because they are, we're so focused on job creation and counting jobs, but we don't always make them meaningful.
Okay,
and maybe
so let me follow up then. Let me follow up on one of the things. Well, put it this way. One thing we hear is that retraining has been a big thing during the course of the last 19 months because people have as we've been discussing, they've had this reckoning where I don't want to go back to the same lousy job, BS jobs as you put it, as the title of the book puts it. Do you have empirical, provable evidence that more and more people are actually coming to that conclusion? They are going in for retraining and then hoping that whenever life gets back more to normal, they'll be better trained for a better job coming out of it.
I don't have it. I'd like to see supplementary data from firms like Indeed. They've been tweeting out some data graphs, maybe LinkedIn starting to understand people from certain industries and the types of jobs they're looking for. Lots of self-selection kind of challenges there. And ultimately, I'd like to know who's been accessing the New Canada training benefit. It's not that new. It's like 2019, but this is something we specifically created to help Canadians offset the cost of retraining and reskilling.
Robyn?
But it's not something that I think is observable yet. Yeah.
Sure. No, I was just going to follow with Robyn. Do you, in the course of doing your work for your series, do you see lots of evidence that people are using this moment to retrain for hopefully better jobs moving forward?
In the type of research that I've been looking at, that's not something that I have looked at either way. I think what I'm hearing a lot about is people staying in their jobs, but maybe taking a step back from some of the more ambitious plans that they had for their career. And that's really what I'm going to be looking at the next couple of years. The reality is, for you to quit your job and pursue a passion, you have to have a certain amount of wealth and a safety net to do that. And especially if you have a mortgage or kids, you might want to do that, but it's not something that's practical for you. But I think the idea of I was going to take on these extra projects, I was going to put my name up for more assignments, and hope with the hopes of getting a promotion or a raise. That's just been something that people, and disproportionately women, have had to take off the table while they're trying to survive this pandemic. So I think that is something that I am seeing for sure and hearing from for sure in the interviews that I'm doing.
All right, having said that, your previous answer suggested that the notion of work-life balance does not really exist in your world right now. However, having said that, does the fact that part of what you do can be done at home on a computer screen and that meetings can take place virtually and there's Zoom and Teams and all this business now, do you think that's helping people achieve better work-life balance, if admittedly still not perfect?
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's two things that I'll get at here. So I think before the pandemic, people were very accustomed to working well outside of that 40-hour work week, that there was an expectation that, okay, you're going to work during the day, but then you're also going to be on email. You're also going to be checking on weekends. You might have to go in on the weekend to do some things. Certainly, this was my reality. While I was working during the week and my kids, we did not have COVID to contend with. But I mostly got the weekends to myself, but I was still doing a little bit of work there. In the pandemic, there's only so many hours. So if I'm already having to work during the week to make up for time that they've missed during the week, I inherently am working a shorter amount of time. And I think that we're seeing that play out a lot for people, is they're being forced to work less because they were working so much before. And that's when we think about a real rethink of people going, wait, maybe I don't want to be working 7 days a week. Maybe I don't want to be working well into the night. Maybe it's important to me that I have dinner with my kids, or that I spend time with friends, that I pursue a hobby. And I think that that is where, again, we're seeing this big shift. I've done a lot of reporting on inequities on Bay Street and in Bay Street law firms. And one of the things I'm hearing from especially women partners, but all partners, is maybe we shouldn't be aspiring to spend every minute of our lives at work as a measure of success.
Well, I'm jumping a bit ahead here, but since you brought it up, and since Monty McNaughton, the Labour Minister's name, has already been invoked, I mean, Deena, there is this thing at Queen's Park right now going through, I guess it started as a bill and it's going through the process right now, the right to disconnect bill. The idea being that if the boss sends you an email at 9 a.m. on a Saturday, you don't have to immediately respond. You respond, Monday. I don't know if that's doable. In some jobs, it's not. But what do you think about that bill in terms of whether it would actually help people have more work-life balance?
I mean, I to be frank, I think that any legislation that Monty McNaughton is bringing out, whether it's for gig workers or the right to disconnect or for temp agency workers, is actually quite a lot of window dressing. There really isn't any teeth behind any of the legislation that's being introduced. And with the right to disconnect, I mean, basically all it's saying is that a company has to have a policy on the right to disconnect. But as someone who works with workers who rely on basic employment standards, I mean, the issue is not about having a policy. The issue is being able to say no without losing your job or the ability to get paid for all of your work. And so we right now have a system. So, you can't have this conversation without having a conversation about what labor rights do workers have in the work, at work. And, I think there is a reason why workers are working longer hours. It's not just because they're, also just passionate about the work. It's because they also can't say no, and they fear that they're going to lose their job. And then when you're in a labor market where there are a lot of people looking for work, you do have a less choice. And so we run an emergency hotline here at the Workers Action Center, and we're getting call after call after call by workers who are afraid of losing their jobs, and are worried about the expectations of employers in white collar jobs, but also in a lot of the jobs that we haven't spoken about so far, the jobs where workers didn't have a choice to stay home and are still, and who are, termed as essential heroes, but who have been working day and night to get us through the pandemic. And those jobs continue to be low paid, continue to be precarious, continue to be poor quality, and the government and Monty McNaughton is actually doing zero about improving those rights. I think we have learned one thing during this pandemic, that we need action to stop infections, and we need to make sure that any legislation we have actually has teeth and has enforcement measures. And that is absolutely not what he's doing right now.
All right, let me get
very disappointing.
You're disappointed. Okay, let me get us back on the path here, and I'll just say a word to our director, Sheldon Osman. Top of page 2, let's get this graphic up, Sheldon, from journalist Derek Thompson of Atlantic Magazine, who wrote the following. The pandemic thrust many families into a homebound lifestyle reminiscent of the 19th century agrarian economy, but this time with screens galore and online delivery. More families today work at home, cook at home, care for kids at home, entertain themselves at home, and even school their kids at home. The writer Aaron M. Wren has called this the rise of the DIY family, do-it-yourself, and it represents a new vision of work-life balance that is still coming into focus. By eliminating the office as a physical presence in many, but not all, families' lives, the pandemic may have downgraded work as the centerpiece of their identity. All right, that's Derek Thompson writing in The Atlantic. Vass, let me pick up that question with you. Is there something, however, about being in the office or being in a workplace that for, I guess, a lot of people is inherently alienating in the way they do their jobs?
I mean, it certainly can be for some people. I think for the people that have been able to continue working and work at home with the flexibility we've been chatting about, I think there's a particular liberation when you're communicating online that can help women who are policed on the tone of their voice and their appearance in the workplace, right? People are saving time on their commute. They're saving time getting ready. We have more relaxed standards for appearances, perhaps. And again, that lets us reconcile with and talk about what work is and what work isn't. And maybe work isn't the beautiful office and the amenities and the water cooler and the chatting with your colleagues. Actually, chatting's really fun. Maybe work is more about the artifacts we're producing and the goals we have and what we're working towards. For others, they have found it very challenging to not have the social stimulation of being in a physical workplace. But when we read about people who don't want to return to work, right, to return to the office, and that's separate from a resignation, I think what people are really communicating is they're not ready to fully go back to what work was before. I don't think it's a total rejection of the physical kind of common workplace. And I think some people are ready to get out of their homes or apartments. It can be difficult to work from home depending on your family situation, the size of your space, frankly.
Well, we've heard what Robyn had to say about that. I can imagine how fascinating it is to try and churn out a 5,000-word piece with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old offering you advice from the sidelines. Let's put it that way. But I wonder, Robyn, do you miss the juice of going into work and chewing the fat with colleagues and bouncing ideas around? And for some people, I mean, that's a huge part of what stimulates and makes them creative in their jobs. How about for you?
I very much miss the newsroom, and I actually have been someone who's been going in, once or twice a week during the pandemic, except during periods when there was, really high COVID numbers or we were in a lockdown. But it's different. There's not many people there, which is why I go in. There's a couple of things here. One, I find it extremely difficult to work at home, especially once my kids get home. If they see me, they think I'm home. I'm playing with them, and it's very crushing when your little child looks at you and says, like, "Mommy, can you put away your computer?" And trying to explain to a 4-year-old the concept of, well, actually, I'm on my computer, but I'm not supposed to be here, and it's only 4:30, and I still need to work for another hour. So that's really difficult. Finding space. I'm constantly confronted with laundry I haven't done or dishes we haven't washed. So that I find very cluttering. I think getting out of myself and my own personal experiences, something that I'm really interested in is groups like women or other diversity-seeking groups were already shut out of so many networking opportunities at work, which I think really impacts raises, promotions, who gets the best assignments. In the world of Zoom, you have to think that that's just going to be accelerated, and many people have written about this. I think that that's going to be a huge consequence to working from home for so many people. And if it's primarily men who return to the workplace, those relationships are just going to be even more solidified. It's human nature to form bonds with people that you're interacting with regularly, that you share similar life experiences with, and you have to make a conscious effort to break those patterns. And a barrier like a computer screen between people is just going to make it that much harder.
This is a perfect segue to the next thing, because you talked about people who are writing about this. And in fact, one of your colleagues at the Globe and Mail, whose last name you're going to help me with because I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It's Rita Trichur?
Rita Trichur.
Trichur. Is that how she says it? Okay. Here's what she had to say about this very topic. With the pandemic now in its 4th wave and younger children still ineligible for COVID-19 vaccines, it stands to reason that women, especially working mothers and family caregivers, will be among the last to return to in-person work. If the hybrid model is indeed the future of work, then executives must make a concerted effort to prevent the office from becoming even more of a boys' club, or else women will be left out of decision-making and passed over for all kinds of advancement opportunities. Okay, Deena, how much do you worry about this?
I really think we're talking about a tale of two pandemics. We're talking about people who had the choice to stay at home and where promotions, and not to say that they're not important, are sort of, the dynamics of the privilege of staying at home and who gets to do the double and triple burden of care. That's one pandemic. The other pandemic is for those women who have been streamlined, and I'm talking about women of color, I'm talking about Black women, I'm talking about immigrant women who have been doing the jobs that nobody else wants to do and have been streamlined into work, such as long-term care, personal support work, grocery stores, retail, food processing, warehouse, logistics. We're talking about men of color who are in truck driving and courier work. This is not even a conversation that they're able to even contemplate, because what they're dealing with is, trying to even get things like paid sick days, and having those permanent paid sick days be something that they can use when they are actually sick, and the ability to be able to say no to a shift or get paid for your work, and dealing with wage theft. So I think we've got to acknowledge the difference in workers here, because I think that those are the workers that I work with. I'm working with women who didn't get any emergency benefits during the pandemic, and in fact are cleaning buildings with their kids on their backs because they have precarious immigration status, and ain't no one looking out for them right now. And so I think we really have to be clear that if we're about improving the rights of women in the workplace, we need to ensure that we're talking about all women, and especially the women who are doing the jobs that nobody else wants to do, because they certainly haven't been protected and have certainly not been given the kinds of rights and benefits that they've needed during the pandemic. And I'm really concerned about them, because I think when you raise the standards for those at the bottom, you raise everyone's standards up. And one of the reasons why women who are staying at home are having such a hard time dealing with their workplace issues is because our labor rights don't allow them to have a voice to challenge the inequities and the discrimination that's happening in the workplace. Our human rights system is completely underfunded and has been torn apart in the last 3 years under the Ford government. And women have less legal teeth to be able to challenge the kinds of things that are happening, let alone those women who are not working at home.
Deena, that's an excellent point, and I'm glad you made it, and I'm glad we now officially have that on the record as well. I wonder if it's possible. I want to look at half of what you said, and I presume it's possible to suggest that many of the women doing the very hard, tough, in some cases miserable jobs that you just described aspire to more, aspire to better. And maybe that's some of what I was talking to Robyn about just a moment ago, where she's frankly lucky and talented enough to have one of those great jobs, but has a hard time doing it for reasons that she described already. Vass, I wonder if you could come in at this point and talk about whether you're concerned about women who have those, if we can call them this, better jobs, and how much falling back they will do during the course of this pandemic for reasons described in Rita's piece in the Globe and Mail.
When I read Rita's piece, I thought about how if men in their 30s were disappearing from the labor market, we'd call it a crisis. And when women do it, we call it a choice. We have data from Statistics Canada, data from RBC, kind of benchmarking about 100,000 women have exited the labor market in the pandemic. We need to know more about who those women are, what professions they were exiting and why. In terms of the hybrid model potentially hurting women, I mean, if you're in a workplace that has an old boys club, the hybrid model is not necessarily something that's new. I think that this is a conversation about expectations related to parenthood. And we're talking about kind of parenthood obligations in white collar work, and whether the hybrid model kind of facilitates more effective work and home life. And it remains to be seen. And there's not necessarily a strong role for the state there, right? This is pretty firm specific, workplace specific. It's about norms that need to evolve, that we can all be a part of doing that. But again, if you were on Bay Street and you weren't getting the meeting invite, I don't think you're getting the meeting invite in a hybrid model, but I don't think that's a function of the hybrid model, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And Robyn, I wonder if if you end up getting, and I appreciate that with a 4 and a 2-year-old, being able to work more from home remotely may be a bit of a pyrrhic victory if in fact you get to do that. But let's sort of broaden our lens on that. If it's the case that more women are going to be allowed to work from home because that allegedly gets them more work-life balance, but then the effect of that is that they're not in on those meetings, and they don't get to network as much with the boss at work, is this in fact a pyrrhic victory coming?
I think it's a big problem. And, I was just looking, I'm trying to find, because the man's name escaped me. I think it's Joe Lonsdale. He's, super rich tech dude, just said men who take, parental leave are losers. And I think this is what we're combating right now, is this idea of specific gender roles. And men face real consequences in their profession for taking on more of the household work and child rearing, even if they want to. And I think my colleague Tim Collad's wrote a great piece about this. He and his partner, the consequences of taking a parental leave and the stigma around it. And women right now are still the default care providers. My husband is wonderful, and we did take a split leave, but it's still expected that women do it. And this is something else that I think is shifting right now, and that we talked about a little bit at the beginning, that this idea of turning off your phone is one example of this shift that I think companies actually need to embrace, whether they're legislated to or not. People want different type of work. I think the men in my life for sure want to be very active dads. They want to be with their kids in the evenings. And it's confronting those stereotypes that have held women back that they are now confronting. And this is where, you see the patriarchy, the old way of doing things hurts everyone. And COVID and what we've been through is a point in time when we are rethinking all of these norms.
Well, your memory is still good, Robyn, I got to say, because I'm on my device right now, and it says UX tech investor Joe Lonsdale refuses to apologize for loser paternity tweet. Correct masculine response to newborn is for men to work harder, says venture capitalist. So there we go. He truly looks like a pompous ass in the picture they've put of him there.
Really
Anyway,
does. And but that's the kind of thing though, where, and I'm not trying to say, I'm not trying to sit here and make excuses for men who are not picking up, their share of household work. But there is research that shows men face greater repercussions in the workplace if they do take time off to be with their kids during parental leave. There's more of a stigma around it, again, because it's violating of a gender role. And so when we think about women having to take time off, and I say having to, many women, of course, want to take time off and be with their babies. And there should be absolutely nothing wrong with that, and it should be celebrated. But there are real career consequences to that. When I took leave off, I had people stop me for years afterwards and say to me, "Aren't you on maternity leave? Didn't you just have a maternity leave? Didn't you just have a baby?" It lingers with you, that, oh, you're a mom now. And we know that just doesn't stick on men the same way. And we just need to kind of spread it out. There's this amazing Supreme Court decision, and I always forget it, and I think it's Safeway, but it's establishing that you can't discriminate you can't discriminate against someone on the basis of pregnancy. And I'm paraphrasing, but the judge essentially says that children benefit all of society, and one gender should not have to bear the brunt of all of that benefit.
That's Robyn Doolittle of the Globe and Mail, Deena Ladd from the Workers' Action Centre, Vass Bednar, McMaster University, and the Ontario Workplace Advisory Committee. Really good of all three of you to join us on TVO for this discussion tonight. Many thanks.
You're welcome.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.